Alright guys, so in this video, I'm going to be discussing the hypothetical scenario on what if September 11th was an accident. Now obviously the first thing we have to understand when discussing this hypothetical is that there would not be a second plane. Originally, when the first plane hit the North Tower, many people thought it was some type of accident, some type of pilot error, maybe the pilot had a stroke, there was some type of issue, and then obviously that changed completely with the South Tower being hit. But if we are basing it off of this hypothetical, obviously only the North Tower would get hit. There would be no coordination. There'd be no second plane. What would happen to the Twin Towers? Obviously, the North in this scenario would still collapse just like it did in real life. But how would it change in terms of would they immediately rebuild it? Would they possibly use this as an excuse to completely redesign Lower Manhattan in the financial district and possibly do a controlled demolition of the South Tower? Because remember, one of the very interesting things when it came to September 11th was the window in between the North and the South Tower collapsing. You had the South Tower collapsing, and it was very hard to get visuals on the North Tower. How were the exterior walls holding up? We saw some images of potential damage the North Tower sustained as a result of the South Tower collapsing down and kind of all the debris field around there. The question is, based off of the dialogue around the towers in the late 90s and the year 2000, would they possibly say, you know what, this was an accident? To me, it completely changes the entire dynamic of the situation, because I had done a hypothetical on what if only one of the towers got hit, but it was deliberate. I think they would have been obligated to rebuild that tower to kind of say, listen, this is the United States. You knock our building down, we're just going to rebuild it right back up, especially considering the other building at that point still would have been built. In real life, they both went down. They decided to go a completely different route, waiting a while and then putting up the Freedom Tower, which is a completely different looking building from either of the Twin Towers. But in general, hypothetically speaking, if this was an accident and it was only one tower, you could get a controlled demolition of the, whether it's north or south, whichever one got hit, of the other tower if it sustained enough damage at its base and also along its walls as a result of the other tower collapsing right next to it, and also the dialogue surrounding it, with both of the towers becoming very obsolete. I think if the towers were still around in 2024 at this point, many people would consider them completely outdated. My expectation would have been that they would have completely redone buildings 4, 5, and 6. The Marriott Hotel would have stayed. It looked fine. It actually had nice exterior windows, but they would have completely redone the 4, 5, and 6 buildings within the World Trade Center just because they looked completely old, completely obsolete. The towers you really can't do much to, just because their design is what it is. It's not like you can do a renovation and completely complace the window design with, openness and allow for more natural light to be let into it. I personally, I like the tower's design because it is unique, but I can understand how people were thinking the buildings were becoming obsolete. So you really have a few different scenarios if it was an accident, and I'm going to show this. This is something that I found on my Discord. If you guys want to join my Discord, link to that will be in the description. A lot of 9/11 talk going on that page, but you can just see this is just a hypothetical article on what if it was an accident, and you can see the accident would have been caused by both of the pilots, or the pilot and the co-pilot, getting an inadequate amount of rest. That was the cause, according to this made-up scenario. I just think it's always interesting to look at these. We've also got other photos looking at the towers. What if the Twin Towers didn't collapse? That's one of my most viewed videos ever, discussing the idea of the towers getting hit, but then remaining up. And the wonder with a situation like that would be, would the towers have to come down anyways, even if they did remain up after the initial impact? And I think I ended up saying, yeah, they would have to come down because they would have so much damage within them. The entire upper floors would be burned pretty much uncontrollably, and the structure would be completely compromised, and no one would want to set foot in them, even if they did get any type of renovation. But that's not this hypothetical. This is more so talking about some type of accident to one of the towers. What would be done? I do think more than likely they would have just rebuilt it. Although, again, because of the situation to where it's an accident and it's not done on purpose. They could have just said, well, it's an accident, it damaged the other tower, there's a lot of debris, things like that. Why not just use this as an opportunity to completely change the, area? Because no matter what, it would cost a ton of money. Like the idea of, oh, they don't want to waste money, they wouldn't bring the other tower down just because, an accident happened in one of them to where one of them collapses and the other stays up. There would still be a bunch of damage. Let's say the north collapses, the south would be damaged significantly on its exterior, and the north obviously would have to be completely cleaned up with all of the rubble and debris, along with many of the other buildings, certainly not all of them, but the Marriott would have been completely destroyed, or at least partially destroyed, to where it would have had to have been totally rebuilt. You could have seen maybe even still a complete rebuilding of the entire World Trade Center district, including buildings 3, 4, 5, and 6, because of just one of the towers collapsing. We don't know the full extent of the damage, that happened in between the south and the north collapsing, to where, like, I can't give you an actual assessment on building 4 right after building 5, building 6, just because there was a lot of smoke in the surrounding areas. Obviously, there's not going to be a lot of photos that were taken in between the window of one of the towers collapsing and the other remaining up. But I think even with an accident, you would see such a catastrophic damage from the collapse of one of the towers that they could just completely redo the entire area, even if it was just one tower being hit by an accident. So that would be kind of my opinion on if it would have been an accident. Certainly the entire gist of the story would have been completely different, especially when it comes to politically what the United States does in response. That changes 1000%. But just talking about the towers and focusing on the World Trade Center complex, the amount of debris that would have hit surrounding buildings, even without the additional second tower collapsing, would have been extremely immense. And it would have caused a complete rebuilding of all of especially the ground buildings, the 8 or 9 story buildings, 4, 5, and 6, along with 3, the Marriott. I mean, listen, if only the North Tower collapsed, the Marriott would have been done anyways. It was split directly in half. I mean, there were parts of it that were still together. When the North came down, it completely got destroyed, but even with just the South, the thing was destroyed beyond repair. There's no renovation that could be done to that building at that point that would save it. You just have to do a controlled demolition of it at that point. But either way, I guess you could make the argument that if, only the South Tower had collapsed and the North was still up, that it could have remained up. But, at that point, you're starting to confuse hypotheticals, because would the North have been hit? Would it have not been hit? Even in a situation where it's an accident, where one of the towers is completely untouched because of the debris falling onto it and the damage in the surrounding area, there is a chance they possibly could just do a controlled demolition of it anyways. But either way, guys, that's just my opinion on that hypothetical. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.